The year was 2741, and the galaxy was a battlefield. The Galactic Coalition, a fragile alliance of over 40 sentient species, was locked in a vicious war against the Vrak, a ruthless insectoid race known for their brutal tactics and near-endless numbers. Every planet near the border had become a war zone, and every soldier sent to fight wore the best armor their species could produce. Power suits, kinetic shields, reinforced alloys, whatever could keep them alive for just a few more minutes under the relentless assault of the Vrak. But amid this sea of armored giants and tech-laden warriors, one figure stood out like a flame in the dark. Corporal Elias Voss of Earth stepped off the troop transport wearing nothing more than a tight-fitting pressure suit and a half-bored expression. No shoulder plating, no reinforced exoframe, just a man and a grin. The Sarnan officer in charge of the drop zone, a creature with 4 arms and translucent skin, blinked in disbelief as Elias approached. "You sure you don't want armor?" he asked, trying to hide his confusion. Elias just stretched his neck from side to side, flexed his gloved fingers, and smirked. "Armor slows me down," he said casually, like he was heading into a gym, not a war. The rest of the Coalition unit watched him with mixed reactions. A few whispered to each other in hushed tones. Others laughed outright. A Tenari sniper clicked its mandibles in amusement, nudging its armored comrade. "Humans," it hissed, always overconfident. Even the Vrak, observing from their distant position with high-powered scopes, marked him as an easy kill, a soft target. But humans had a reputation in the outer systems, and not everyone dismissed Elias so easily. The drop zone was quiet for now, but the silence never lasted long on this planet. The sky above was a dull crimson, constantly hazy with dust storms and chemical clouds from the Vrak's environmental weapons. The ground trembled slightly every few seconds, a reminder that this world, like so many others, was dying. Soldiers adjusted their weapons, checked power levels, calibrated shield outputs. Elias, meanwhile, knelt down and picked up a fist-sized rock. He tossed it in the air once, caught it, and nodded to himself like it passed some kind of test. Then the sirens began. Red lights flashed across the Coalition base as radar picked up incoming Vrak forces. Hundreds of signatures, maybe thousands. The soldiers braced themselves, forming lines, engaging defensive protocols. The Vrak came fast, their legs slicing through the sand, weapons clicking into place, shrieking in unison. The atmosphere crackled with tension. Elias didn't flinch. He stood at the front of the line, still unarmored, still unshaken. A lieutenant barked an order for him to fall back, but he didn't move. He just cracked his knuckles and started walking forward. The other species watched stunned, as this seemingly fragile human closed the distance between himself and the enemy without hesitation. Plasma blasts lit the air, and still Elias moved, ducking, weaving, rolling. Not one shot touched him. He hit the first Vrak with a punch that sent the creature flying backwards into its own squad. Then he grabbed another by the mandibles and slammed it into the dirt. Within seconds, chaos broke out. The Vrak formation, designed to crush armored resistance, struggled to counter someone who moved like smoke and struck like thunder. The human wasn't just surviving, he was winning. From the back line, a young recruit whispered, "How is he not dead?" An older soldier, a veteran of Earth's Marine Corps, just chuckled. "That's a human," he said quietly. "And armor's optional when you're built different." As the battle raged and Elias vanished into the storm of enemies, the legend began to grow. He wasn't just a soldier, he was something else. Something the galaxy hadn't seen before, and something the Vrak had no idea how to stop. The night fell heavy over the outpost, the sky glowing faintly with the reflection of distant explosions. The Coalition soldiers knew what was coming. The Vrak didn't believe in surprise. They believed in overwhelming force, raw numbers, and total destruction. The first warning came as a tremor beneath the ground, followed by the eerie clicking of Vrak legs in the distance. Then, like a black wave crawling over the hills, they appeared, hundreds of them, armored, screeching, and hungry for blood. Coalition alarms screamed through the base, and soldiers scrambled into defensive positions, hearts racing. Plasma turrets rotated to lock onto targets. Commanders barked orders through comms. It was chaos, but trained chaos. Every species had protocols. Every unit had drills. Everyone knew what to do when the Vrak came swarming. Everyone except Elias. While the others crouched behind barriers, shield generators flaring to life, Elias stood tall at the edge of the trench line. The red warning lights lit his face as he cracked his neck, watching the incoming swarm without a hint of fear. Most of the Vrak carried plasma rifles or acid blade limbs designed to slice through the toughest exo-armor. But Elias had no armor, no high-tech gear, no backup weapon, just his standard-issue sidearm and a metal rod he'd found near a broken turret earlier that day. It wasn't even straight, but he spun it in his hand like it was an extension of his arm. The Vrak reached the outer walls in seconds, unleashing a storm of plasma fire and sonic bursts. Explosions erupted across the outpost. Walls cracked, shields buckled. Soldiers hit the ground or pulled back behind their lines. The air burned with heat and dust. And then, through the smoke, something strange happened. Elias moved forward. Not cautiously, not tactically. He sprinted straight into the open, straight toward the Vrak, with no cover, no plan, and no fear. Plasma bolts flew past him, some missing by inches, others deflected as he twisted his body mid-run. It was like watching a shadow dance in the firelight. He was too fast, too unpredictable. He reached the first Vrak soldier and slammed the metal rod across its legs, flipping the creature over in a heap. Before the others could react, Elias dropped low, rolled under a swinging claw, and came up inside the enemy formation. In close quarters, the Vrak's size and armor worked against them. Elias was everywhere, smashing knees, elbows, jaws. He moved like a storm, never stopping, never hesitating. He grabbed weapons from the dead and used them without pause. He threw grenades not to kill, but to blind and confuse. Each movement was calculated, not random. Every action had purpose. The coalition soldiers watched in disbelief from their positions. A Yalit commander, his eyes wide behind his reinforced helmet, could barely speak. "Humans," he muttered, "have armor, but it's under their skin." His words spread quickly among the troops. Some cheered, others just stared. The enemy formation, once so confident, now hesitated. Their weapons were built for power, not speed. Their minds were trained to fight predictable, armored opponents. But Elias was different. He didn't fight like a soldier. He fought like a force of nature. Within minutes, the tide of the battle shifted. Inspired by what they were witnessing, some soldiers pushed forward, emboldened by Elias's madness. Turrets recalibrated, fire teams advanced, and Elias? He kept going, deeper into the Vrak swarm, dodging blasts, leaping from cover to cover, using their own confusion against them. It wasn't just bravery, it was control. He knew what he was doing, even if no one else could understand it. When the battle finally slowed and the smoke cleared, Elias stood in the middle of a heap of fallen Vrak. He was breathing hard, bloodied, but upright. Not a single piece of armor on him. Just dirt, sweat, and the wide-eyed gaze of every soldier who had seen the impossible become real. That night, the story of Elias Voss, the man with no armor, spread like wildfire across the coalition channels. And the Vrak, for the first time, learned fear. Dr. Kirianvar had studied over 17 different species in her time as a senior coalition xenobiologist, but nothing, absolutely nothing, prepared her for the humans. Assigned to the front lines as a research observer, she had expected to study the effects of long-term combat stress across species. Instead, she found herself drawn to one particular anomaly, Corporal Elias Voss. He had become the subject of every conversation across the scientific and military networks, a man who walked through fire without armor, who fought like instinct had fused with war. Kirian first watched his combat recordings in silence, slowed down, frame by frame, trying to understand. His muscles reacted before danger even arrived. His eyes remained calm in the middle of chaos. When others hesitated, he attacked. When others retreated, he advanced. To most, this was madness. To her, it was data. She needed answers. The day she met Elias in person, he was sitting on the edge of a landing platform, eating what looked like half-cooked rations with a kind of lazy satisfaction. He barely looked at her as she approached, just offered a nod and kept chewing. Kirian, who belonged to a delicate, thin-boned aquatic species known for their caution and high intelligence, stood a safe distance away. She carried a datapad filled with biological readings, medical scans, and performance metrics that made no sense. According to every chart, Elias should not have survived half the things he'd endured: internal bleeding, fractured bones, dehydration, and yet, here he was, casually eating lunch like he hadn't fought through a swarm of wrack just 2 nights ago. "I don't understand," she said, not hiding the frustration in her voice. "You don't wear armor. You're always injured, and yet you keep returning to the battlefield. How?" Elias glanced at her with a slight smirk. "We're used to it," he said. "Pain isn't new to us. It's just background noise." Kirian tilted her head, trying to process his words. "But why not avoid pain entirely? Your species has access to advanced armor systems. Why refuse them?" He shrugged, setting his meal aside. "Lady, we evolved throwing rocks at tigers. Armor wasn't an option. Winning was." That quote alone ended up in her report's title, but it was only the beginning. Kirian ran extensive studies on human soldiers and found patterns that defied everything known in coalition science. Their pain tolerance spiked under threat. Their adrenaline surged to dangerous levels without damaging their systems. Their brains lit up with complex activity in the middle of battle, a mix of fear, aggression, and something else, something that looked like joy. Humans weren't just surviving war, they were built for it. She discovered they could function on less sleep, endure higher stress, and even laugh in the face of death. Laughter. In war, no other species did that. Kirian's report, titled Humans, Weaponized Evolution, spread through the coalition like wildfire. Military commanders read it twice. Medical officers tried to verify every claim. Civilians from peaceful worlds watched archived footage of Elias Voss punching a Vrak elite in the jaw and surviving a fall from a dropship with only bruised ribs. Her analysis painted a picture of a species not bred for safety or comfort, but for danger, chaos, and the wild balance of survival. The coalition's scientists debated her findings for weeks. Some called it exaggeration. Others began revising their combat doctrines. The Vrak intercepted parts of the report and dismissed it at first. Back in the field, Elias barely reacted when Kirian told him about the report's impact. He just leaned back, arms behind his head, looking at the scorched sky. "People always try to explain us," he said, half to himself. "But until they've bled like we have, they won't get it." Kirian didn't argue. She had seen the data, but she also understood something more now. There were some things science couldn't measure, like sheer willpower, stubborn defiance, and the human instinct to win even when everything screamed retreat. Whatever humanity was, it wasn't insanity. It was something far more dangerous, deliberate, unpredictable resilience. They called themselves the Barebones, and the name wasn't just for show. No heavy plating, no reinforced mechs, not even powered exosuits. Just humans in tight pressure gear, carrying packs full of tools, explosives, and bad ideas. The coalition had always seen them as a support species, resilient, sure, but reckless, too fragile for frontline roles. That perception changed the day the Barebones were sent behind enemy lines on a mission so dangerous. The simulations showed 90% casualties. No one expected them to survive. In fact, most commanders quietly prepared obituaries, but the humans didn't flinch. When Elias Voss was given the briefing, he didn't ask how many were going to die. He just asked, What's the terrain like? That was all he needed. Terrain meant opportunity. Chaos meant fun. The target was a hidden Vrak supply hub, buried in a canyon system so deep even the drones had trouble navigating it. The Vrak had fortified every entrance and patrolled the skies with lethal precision. The coalition couldn't risk a full assault, but the Barebones, they weren't interested in conventional plans. They moved in at night, crawling through the rocky ravines like shadows, planting false signals and sound emitters that mimicked tank engines. They used bait drones and detonated timed charges to simulate full-scale attacks in places they never went. The Vrak were trained for brute force and predictable strategies, but the humans didn't play by any book. They sabotaged water lines with heating coils, making Vrak soldiers abandon posts from thermal overload. They smeared themselves in local minerals to avoid detection by thermal scans. They left graffiti in enemy tunnels, not to intimidate, but to confuse. Strange symbols, taunting phrases, drawings of teeth and grins. Within 24 hours, the Vrak divisions started unraveling. By the third day, they were shooting at shadows, unsure of where the next hit would come from. The Barebones struck in teams of 3, always from unexpected angles, using distractions and dirty tricks to outmaneuver the larger, stronger enemies. One squad rigged a whole cliffside to collapse under a transport convoy. Another sealed off a Vrak tunnel and flooded it with knockout gas made from local plants. Elias himself led a charge with nothing but smoke grenades and a flare launcher, dancing through chaos like a conductor in an orchestra of war. When the coalition scanners finally picked up the all-clear signal, no one believed it, but the feed showed the truth. The Vrak hub was in flames, their forces retreating in panic, and every member of the Barebones was accounted for. Not a single casualty. Coalition commanders gathered in silence, watching the recorded footage. What they saw wasn't traditional warfare. It was mayhem, brilliant tactical mayhem. From that day forward, the strategies changed. No more holding humans back as support. Now, when things got bad, they were sent in first. Not because they had better weapons or stronger tech, but because they turned chaos into an advantage. News of the mission spread fast. The Vrak began reporting signs of psychological distress in their frontline soldiers. Stories surfaced of eerie whispers in the dark, laughter echoing in caves, strange human shapes slipping through defenses. Entire squads hesitated when they heard footsteps with no armor clanking, just soft, steady boots. When the battlefield went quiet, the Vrak began to panic, not because they expected silence, but because they knew what followed. It always began the same way: stillness, a strange calm. Then, from the fog or over a ridge, came the sound of boots. No metal, no shields, just the stomping rhythm of Barebones humans approaching. And then the war cries, loud, wild, unfiltered rage and joy wrapped into a single roar. The kind of sound that didn't just reach your ears, it reached your bones. And the Vrak, once fearless, learned to fear the quiet, because the quiet meant the Barebones were near. And the Barebones never came to play. Something had changed on the battlefield, something even the Vrak couldn't explain. It wasn't in the numbers, or the weapons, or the maps. It was in the air, in the way soldiers hesitated before stepping into human territory. The fear started small, a single squad that vanished in the canyon with no trace. Then another, found disarmed and tied upside down from trees, each helmet missing, eyes wide open. Soon, whispers replaced orders. Stories passed from one Vrak camp to another, growing darker each time. The humans didn't wear armor because they didn't need to. Bullets didn't kill them. Fire didn't stop them. They weren't soldiers. They were something else entirely, and leading them was the one the Vrak began to call the Unbreakable One. Elias Voss, once just another name on a mission log, had become something far more powerful than a warrior. He was a symbol. The coalition celebrated him as a hero, but to the Vrak, he was something closer to a nightmare. He didn't fall. He didn't run. He didn't die. Wherever the fighting was worst, that's where Elias showed up. Not behind cover, not in tanks, but walking straight into enemy fire with nothing but a rifle, a knife, and that terrifying human grin. Every attempt to trap or eliminate him had failed. Sniper squads were found unconscious or worse. Tracking beacons went silent. Explosives were disarmed before they could detonate. Elias didn't just survive, he made the enemy doubt themselves. The rumors spread faster than fire through dry leaves. Some Vrak began to refuse missions that involved human territory. Discipline broke down in isolated units. Morale crumbled. Field reports recorded strange behavior, twitching, paranoia, even hallucinations of hearing human voices in the dark. And through it all, the legend of the Unbreakable One grew. He was said to have torn through an entire bunker with his bare hands, to have caught a plasma blade with nothing but a metal pipe, to have walked away from a crashed dropship with broken ribs and kept fighting. None of it could be proven, all of it was believed. Back at Coalition Command, strategists noticed the shift too. Engagements with Vrak forces became shorter, less direct. Patrols abandoned posts at the first sight of human presence. Sometimes they left equipment behind, fleeing before a shot was even fired. And still, the humans pressed forward, using the enemy's fear like a weapon. Elias's unit, the Barebones, didn't just strike anymore. They haunted. They left signs behind. Human boot prints near supply crates, carved symbols on cave walls, small recordings that played whispers in the Vrak language saying, "We see you." It wasn't war. It was psychological domination. Vrak commanders tried to control the panic, but it was already too late. Fear had rooted itself deep, and the seed was Elias Voss. Entire Vrak divisions changed course when they intercepted human signals. Orders were sent to avoid direct confrontation. Retreats were sanctioned if the Unbreakable One was detected. No other coalition soldier had ever broken an enemy's spirit like this. And Elias? He didn't care about titles. He didn't see himself as a legend. He still cleaned his gear by hand, still cracked jokes with his squad, still grinned that same grin before every drop. But he understood fear. He knew what it could do, how it could rot an army from the inside out, and he used it without mercy. In one recording retrieved from a fallen Vrak scout drone, a terrified soldier could be heard whispering to his squad. His voice was shaking. "They don't wear armor because they don't need it. They are the weapon." That clip was played in coalition war rooms, shared among human units as motivation, and studied by intelligence officers trying to understand what made Elias and his kind so terrifying. But the truth was simple. The humans had stopped trying to be like the rest of the galaxy. They didn't need to match the Vrak's armor or firepower. They just needed to be what they always were: dangerous, unpredictable, and absolutely unafraid. The war was shifting, and everyone could feel it. What had once seemed like a desperate struggle for survival had turned into a steady march toward victory. The coalition, long battered by Vrak's strength and relentless tactics, began to push back. The difference? Humans. Not just their bravery, not just their strength, but the way they thought, the way they fought. With Elias Voss and the Barebones taking the lead on missions that were previously deemed impossible, morale soared across the front lines. Alien generals began calling for human tactics during planning sessions. Requests poured in from command units across the stars. "Send us a Barebones advisor. Teach us how they do it." Elias, though no formal instructor, found himself leading training camps, showing alien squads how to think like a human in battle. No set formations, no reliance on shields or tech, just instinct, speed, distraction, and calculated madness. It wasn't about brute force. It was about surviving through chaos, and then turning that chaos into a weapon. Inspired by their success, other species began testing similar tactics. Some even ditched their armor entirely, believing the key lay in the simplicity. But the truth hit hard. They didn't have the muscle memory, the reflexes, or the psychological tolerance humans had developed through millennia of fighting to live. Without armor, they were vulnerable. They hesitated in the heat of the moment. They panicked under fire. Many died trying to imitate the humans, and soon the coalition realized something vital. Humanity's power wasn't just physical, it was evolutionary. They had not adapted to war. They had been born in it. Still, the Vrak weren't finished. Their pride couldn't tolerate defeat. In a last desperate act, they assembled their largest force yet for a direct strike on the coalition capital world, Ralveth Prime. The move shocked even their own commanders, who believed such an open assault was suicidal. But the Vrak needed a symbol. They wanted to break the coalition's spirit with one crushing blow. If Ralveth Prime fell, the alliance might fracture. The coalition High Council scrambled to organize a defense, calling every able soldier to the planet. The barebones were already en route before the orders were even finalized. Elias didn't wait for permission. He saw the attack for what it was, a chance to finish this war. His unit landed near the frontline command center, boots thudding against the ground with that familiar, unnerving lack of armor. Just precious suits, rifles, and faces that carried no fear. Elias stood on the edge of the staging ridge, staring out at the dark horizon where Vrak ships descended like locusts. He cracked his knuckles, the sound sharp in the air, and looked at the nearest alien officer who had just finished briefing his troops. "You want this planet?" Elias asked the empty air, knowing full well that the enemy could hear them through intercepted broadcasts. "Come take it, but you better pack a lunch." The line wasn't poetic, but it spread like fire. Within hours, coalition soldiers across the trenches were repeating it over comms, scribbling it on armor plates, carving it into walls. When the Vrak came, they expected resistance. What they got was a storm. Humans charged first, diving into fire without hesitation. The barebones split the enemy lines, attacking from unexpected angles, throwing chaos into their formations. Smoke, traps, sonic decoys, firebombs, anything to disrupt. Behind them, inspired alien units followed, finally understanding that humans didn't just fight, they hunted. It wasn't brute strength that held the line at Ralveth Prime. It was relentless aggression, clever traps, and the chilling sound of war cries echoing through smoke. Elias moved like a force of nature, his presence alone enough to rally those around him. The line held, then it advanced. The war that once tore across stars and scorched 100 worlds was finally over. The Vrak, beaten and broken, stood down. Their warlords, once feared across the galaxy, signed a surrender treaty with trembling claws. Silence followed, deep, uncertain silence, as the galaxy tried to understand what had truly happened. It wasn't the superior weapons of the coalition that ended the bloodshed. It wasn't the strategy of admirals or the power of fleets. It was the force of something far less technical, far more primal. It was the raw will of a species no one had expected to lead, humanity. And now, at the Grand Chamber of the Galactic Council, the war's end was to be made official. Delegates of every species gathered in a domed hall glowing with soft blue lights, their eyes drawn not to their own generals or politicians, but to the squad standing proudly at the front, dirty, bruised, uniformed but unarmored. The barebones. And at the center of them all stood Elias Voss, arms crossed, a tired but satisfied smirk on his face. His precious suit was scuffed, one sleeve torn at the elbow, and in his hand he held a dented helmet, the only piece of armor he'd ever bothered to carry and never once worn. The council speaker, a tall, crystalline being from Threx Prime, raised his voice. "By unanimous vote," he declared, his voice echoing, "we honor those who have redefined the limits of courage. In recognition of the humans' role in saving this alliance, and with full awareness of their unique biology and combat doctrine, we hereby pass Regulation 9.7 The chamber lights dimmed briefly, then brightened as a massive holographic script filled the space above the delegates. Armor is mandatory in all combat zones, unless you're a human. There was a pause, the kind that carries both confusion and awe. A few murmurs passed through the crowd, laughter, disbelief, quiet clapping. Then the silence was broken by the clatter of metal. Elias had tossed the helmet to the floor with a dull echo that rippled across the hall. "Thanks," he said, loud enough for all to hear, "but we'll stick with tradition." The room erupted, not just with applause, but with a deep collective exhale. Even the most serious diplomats cracked smiles. The barebones exchanged grins and shoulder pats, some shaking their heads in disbelief, not at the rule, but at the journey. They had started as an overlooked species, barely respected, rarely trusted in high-risk operations, and now they were legends. But what made the galaxy lean closer, what made the other species truly respect humanity, wasn't just strength or tactics. It was what the humans had endured, how they blurred and kept going, how they laughed in the face of death, how they fought not for glory or conquest, but because survival was in their bones. After the ceremony, a reporter from the Sarnan Newsnet asked Elias what he thought made humans different. He looked at the camera, thoughtful for a second, then said, "We didn't evolve with armor. We had sharp sticks and sharper instincts. We don't run from the fight, we figure it out." He tapped his temple. "Our armor's in here, and in here." He tapped his chest next. "That's what kept us standing." Back on Earth, children would hear stories of Elias Voss, the man who turned war into a game of wit and grit. Recruit posters featured his silhouette with the phrase "Be barebones brave." The galaxy didn't just learn to respect humans, they learned to rethink what bravery really looked like. And in the years that followed, when new threats rose and old dangers returned, it was always the same phrase whispered in hopeful voices: "Send in the humans." Because now they knew the strongest armor wasn't forged in steel or plasma, it was forged in the heart.